And the reason why they're coming here is the Chesapeake Bay is just it's a world-class estuary. It's got everything that an eagle could want. It's got lots of trees, it's got lots of prey species, waterfowl, fish. It's got very shallow waters, which allow the eagles to see the fish. And it doesn't often freeze up the entire bay. It's pretty rare for it to freeze up. And we estimate that the Chesapeake Bay is supporting between 15 and 20,000 eagles a year, which is pretty amazing. If you think about 30 years ago, what the population of eagles were in the U.S., that we're able to support that much. And it's because we have all these food resources. So the Chesapeake Bay, which is right here, and for those of you who are not from Norfolk, you guys are right here. So we've got the Chesapeake Bay, and I'm sure Bryan probably talked about this last night, this convergence zone. So we're right at the heart of this latitude where we've got lots of prey, and the bay does not freeze up in the wintertime very often, or at least not the entire bay. So we have birds that are coming here in the winter. We're estimating about 5,000 are coming down from Canada, and then we also have got about 5,000 coming up from Florida in the summertime. But then we've also got our resident eagles, and we're estimating, I think I've said, about 10,000 birds, and so that's a rough guesstimate. We no longer are able to survey the population as carefully as we were in the very beginning, 70s and 80s of the monitoring. Just because of funding, it's almost impossible to survey every single nest. There's just not enough money, and that's in part because there are so many nests. So it's actually a great success story that we can't monitor them all. We've had to move on to other species in parallel. What's really interesting about working in the Chesapeake Bay that I didn't have down when I worked in Florida is that the bay, during their breeding season, they're constantly being bombarded with eagles from other populations. So they're seeing eagles coming in from Canada and from the northern U.S. during these key periods here of building nests, incubating eggs, raising small young. So they're competing for fish with these other birds, and they're also potentially having other eagles in their nest territory that they're having to defend against. And then in the summer months, so they have a very, very small break here where the birds are, the migrants are moving in and out. And then we've got the southern migrants that move in for these months where the chicks are getting ready to fledge. So it's a pretty unique position that the Chesapeake Bay eagles are in on the landscape on the Atlantic coast. So at the Center for Conservation Biology, we've done hundreds of projects on bald eagles, and we focus on a couple of different subjects. We look at the breeding population using nesting surveys, and we're looking at both reproductive rates and then overall looking at population growth. We're looking at the non-breeding birds using concentration area surveys. So we drive our boat up and down the tributaries. So we drive up and down, or I should say we boat up and down the James River, and we count eagles. So any eagle of any age we're counting. So we're trying to assess the population. And then we're also following the population using different tracking methods, both just by banding and also by using satellite transmitters. And Bryan probably talked about this last night, so I'll just go through it briefly. We use a fixed-wing aircraft. It's just a small little two-seater plane. And this is Brian Watts and Mitchell Bird here. And I think that's their pilot, Fuzzo, who's been a long-time pilot for a couple decades now. And we fly anywhere from 150 feet to 200 feet above the ground, which if the tree is about 100 feet, you can imagine how close we are when we're coming in on these birds. And they'll sit tight. This bird is incubating. They sit tight. They look up at the plane, and we move on. So we do a very quick glimpse. This will give you an idea of where the nests are in the bay. And what I want you to pull out of this is these main tributaries. So this is the James River. You guys are down here. This is the Norfolk Botanical Garden nest right here. So this is the James. Here's the York, the Rappahannock River, the Potomac. Those are just amazing amazing populations of eagles have really filled in there. And let's see, we don't know as much. This is Maryland data in blue, and they stopped surveying about a decade ago, so we don't have as many nests reported there just because different survey methods. So we're seeing just some exponential population growth. It's been pretty incredible. I know Bryan's been trying to keep up with it. Just so many nests to survey. So that's just kind of the background of the eagles in the Chesapeake Bay. I'm going to move on to trapping the eagles, and then I'll talk about how that trapping and tracking of the birds has given us more understanding. So we have a variety of different trapping methods, which are very fun. I didn't know anything about fish until I'm not a fisherman. I'm actually vegetarian, so I just literally had no idea anything about fish. And had to get down in the nitty-gritty of opening fish up and baiting sites for eagles, which is a lot of fun. We climb trees like we do with the botanical gardens. This is a Fish and Wildlife Service biologist that we work with, Craig Copey. And then we also bait with deer. So these are roadkill deer that we bait a net. That's the most fun way to catch them. This is a bird that we scooped up out of the water after we caught it with a fish trap. And anyone want to guess the age of that bird?
2?
I would say somewhere between 2 and 3. That's another thing. You can look at 5 different birds that are all around 2, and they're all going to look totally different. So it's definitely a best guesstimate. So you guys are probably familiar. We put on these different color bands so we can keep track of them. And we fit the transmitter on using a backpack harness. And one thing that's been really nice about working with eagles is they were the original species that was tracked with these transmitters in the early 80s. So they've been carrying these transmitters successfully for over 30 years. So we know that they're safe to handle, to hold these transmitters. It doesn't affect the way that they breed, the way that they fly, the way that they forage, as opposed to some of the other species that we work with that are a lot more sensitive, and we have to think a lot more carefully about the weight of the transmitter we put on, how we put it on. This is a very well-tested method. This is just a little bit about the transmitter and the harness. It's nothing different from what you guys have seen here at the garden. The material of the harness is actually made out of Teflon, so it's very rigorous. You can undergo lots of environmental wear and tear. And then this is how the data gets to us, which is this kind of complicated method, but from the GPS satellites, gets downloaded into the transmitter, and then goes back up to a NOAA satellite, a weather satellite, where it then gets downloaded onto Sea Turtle, which is one of our partners, and they are archiving it, and they are showing the maps for us for free. And so that's how we got linked into Sea Turtle. It's not that we're tracking sea turtles, but they're helping us out. And then this is lovely me. I don't wear high heels to work, but I just like this picture. And then we're also looking at getting our maps up on movebank.org. They have installed some new software that I think will allow us to be able to use their Google Maps. So it'll be a lot nicer to be able to see the maps in a lot greater detail. So these are the birds we've been tracking from the Chesapeake Bay. And we tried to stratify the deployment of the units based on what we thought the migratory population they came from. So if we caught a gigantic bird, so let me back up. So birds that are, eagles that are from, all right, didn't work anymore. Eagles that are from the northern part of the population are going to be much larger. So there's a latitudinal gradient, and birds that are down in Florida are going to be much smaller. So when we caught birds in the wild, we had no idea where they were from. They're not banded. There's no source of history to them. So we're just gauging them on what their body size is. So when we put the transmitters on, literally we were just guessing, okay, yeah, I think this is depending on the time of year as well. We knew in the wintertime, they're going to be from certain populations. So I think it actually turned out pretty well. So we had both birds that were from the southern population that went down to Florida and then came back to the Chesapeake Bay. Ones that were from the northern population went all the way up into the northernmost parts of Labrador and Quebec. And then they come back down to the Chesapeake Bay. And then we've got our resident population, which had over half of the birds that we deployed on were from the Chesapeake Bay. And I wish I still had my pointer, but so we've got these concentration areas. And the breeding map that I showed you before, where all the nests are lining up on these tributaries, the reason why the birds are there is because of the richness of the waters. So it's a low salinity area. It's what we call tidal fresh and oligohaline, and those are terms that have to do with the parts per million of salt that's in the water. So that low salinity area is very rich in fish. And so that's why the birds are piling in there to breed, and also the non-breeders are going there. So here's the James, the York, Rappahannock, Potomac, the Upper Bay where the Susquehanna River comes in, the Nanticoke, and then the Pocomoke.
This is Libby and Reese. Do you guys mind if I post your presentations on YouTube?
Yes, that's fine.
Reese, okay?
Yep.
Thank you.